let's pivot a little bit to the recent FOMC meeting, because it kind of touches on what we're talking about here. I think some market participants wanted Powell to push back a little bit on these rising speculative markets, especially after how much money was printed the last several years. But he didn't really. He kind of contradicted himself in that press conference. He spoke about how it was almost a premature victory on inflation, how it's very positive that they're seeing all this disinflation everywhere. And then at the same time, he said, well, there's still inflation, though. It's still high. So he kind of contradicts himself, but the market liked it, and market assets rallied after that presser, and financial conditions continued to loosen over the last couple months. I wanted to read a short thread from this FinTwit account, Carlo Cassio, Kitty. Yeah, he's great. He's great. But I wanted to get your reaction to this. He says, the Fed committed a massive policy mistake by not pushing against market pricing cuts that started in Q4 2022. While they used all sorts of spurious bullshit to dance around their transitory, disastrous fallacy, they are now the only possible recipient of blame. With rising net disposable incomes, fiscal and monetary impulses fully faded, labor market burning hot, all-time high home equity, available excess savings, stocks still high, inflation is about to accelerate, and they are firmly behind the curve. How long they remain behind the curve will be crucial in determining how high they need to hike. But whatever that number is, it's much higher than the current terminal. And so what do you guys think of that take? Because I kind of agree with him. I lean towards that inflation is more entrenched than they think. It's going to be stickier than think with these, labor's super tight and got a lot of wage pressures. And I think that they're probably behind the curve, and they'll probably actually need to hike higher than they expect to. What do you guys think?
I think that is accurate, and that's what they should do. But I think what they're setting themselves up to do is to rejigger the inflation numbers, claim victory, even though they don't have victory. They're making a bet that the economy is going to slow down, and I think the economy will slow down. There's a lag effect. And I don't think they'll go beyond the 5 or 5.25 terminal rate. And then we will get another wave of inflation, and their figuring is they'll deal with that when that happens. That it strikes me when I looked at Powell and what he said in this last presser. I think, and Broman said this in one of his most recent letters, I think he realized how trapped he is, and I think he's chosen to try and pretend to be Volcker, but not really be Volcker, and let it run hot. And he'll just say, look, he'll try to pretend that he's been a hard ass, even though he hasn't. Remember, Volcker had to take rates to 20%. We're a long ways away from 20% to tame that inflationary psychology. So I don't know how he realistically thinks that being at 5% is going to get us where he wants to go. But I think he's aware of how at risk the economy is if he goes a lot beyond that. So I think he realizes he's going to be Burns, and he's going to let it happen while using rhetoric that makes pretending to be Volcker. And when it doesn't work, he's going to blame it on the market or something other than himself. My guess is he'll get out and pass the baton to somebody else.
Yeah.
So
what do you think, Chris?
Let's be careful, because Volcker had a total debt to GDP number that was in the 60s, and Powell has a total debt to GDP number that's twice that size, 120% of GDP. So it's absolutely impossible for Powell to take rates to 20%, because then the debt spiral just implodes at a much faster rate, okay? These are the numbers. The last 2 years, the average coupon on the government debt was 1.5%, okay? And the interest burden was $400 billion annually. Now, with a combination of higher debt levels because of deficits, as well as higher interest rates, the average coupon is going to be 3%, and it's going to be close to $1 trillion annually, as Larry mentioned. That's at 3%, guys. That's $1 trillion. That's 25% of tax revenues. Wait until the current 10-year rate rolls into the funding as an average funding rate, and you're going to be over 1.2 trillion. That's at a 4.5 or 4% rate. Put the same number in there at 20%, guys, and you are running a deficit that is 5 times larger than your total tax revenue because of the interest burden. Now, please, guys, stop, full stop. You can be that guy who just did that. I'm not sure who he was. It sounded funny. The problem is when you realize how the math works, you're like, it's impossible. You cannot do this. So there was the guy from Starwood Trust. Who's the guy? He was on with CNBC, and he's doing the math with Joe Kernan. Barry Sternlicht. And he's doing the math with Joe Kernan and knucklehead Alex Ross Sorkin and Becky Quick. And he's running through the math, and you can see these guys, and they're like, whoa, oh my God. And then they sort of, okay, cut to commercial. Okay, we can't actually tell the U.S. audience the mathematics behind this. Go to commercial. You know, get them off the air. They hook them off or change the subject because the math doesn't work. So you can be anything you want. When you have a 60% total debt to GDP, you can be the inflation fighting Batman, and you can take rates to 20%. But do that when it's 120% of GDP and growing, because our deficits, spending and fiscal spending and all this stuff, I build a bridge to heaven and a bridge to Pennsylvania from fucking Seattle. Hey, dude, can't fucking suck and blow, okay? You can either spend the money and go into a debt spiral, or you can keep interest rates artificially low, but you can't do both, okay? So I just am so sick of this fake mathematics. And when the people on TV finally point it out, they don't want to listen. They're like, oh, please tell me that's not true. It's like me having a 4th credit card to pay the interest on my first 3 credit cards. You think that's actually responsible fiscal governance? No. Well, that's exactly what the government's doing. So like it or not, even if inflation runs hot, you can't fight it by raising rates. Why? Because you'll just accelerate this debt burden, and they could keep printing money to do it. It just means your debasement accelerates as well. So all paths lead to Bitcoin and hard assets. Never seen a simpler trade in my whole life. That being said, no one else is listening. So
sounds like opportunity.
We're listening. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm listening. That was great. So what do you say to Charlie Munger then? Because Charlie Munger is going writing Wall Street Journal op-eds calling for an outright ban and praising, the CCP for their, reaction to Bitcoin. If Charlie was in the room with us right now, what would you guys say to him? Go, Larry, I'll let you go first.
I'd tell him to go fuck himself. I mean, I think he's a fucking asshole cantillionaire. I mean, he's said so many evil things. I mean, the guy, I absolutely hate the guy as a prick. Basically, he got rich off a fiat system that he played like a fiddle. And as my friend Mark Juskovic said, he wants to pull the ladder up behind him and let everybody else, suffer. He doesn't see any of the benefit of Bitcoin. He conflates Bitcoin with crypto. He's a cantillionaire. He's a perfect example of what he himself said, which is, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. Well, the incentives for him are to live in a fiat system where he gets cheap access to the money. And that's what he's done. And he's used that to create, hundreds of millions for himself, and if not billions for himself, but at the expense of the rest of the world. And, I find it very objectionable that he defends that system, being smart enough to know how evil it is and how much it's benefited him. So I have nothing nice to say to that guy. I think he's a piece of shit.
I love being on with Larry because I'm going to actually say something that's going to be less pointed, but I'm not very good at having tact as well. So I've already told Charlie on another podcast he can go fuck himself as well. So Larry, I'll agree with you on that. But Charlie is a cantillionaire who understands the system and has made a lot of money off it. I'll agree with that as well. But he's giving poor advice to my children and my children's children. And for that, I'm very disappointed. Because if he does truly believe what he's saying, then he shouldn't be in a position of power like he is. And I believe he actually knows what he's saying and therefore is trying to, as Larry said, benefit him at the expense of a lot of other people in the world. So the only good thing I can bring to this discussion is an expression that I said today on a Swan Bitcoin Spaces with Alex. I said, Charlie Munger should not buy green bananas. And what does that mean? It means he may not be along long enough to see those bananas ripen. And that's a good thing so that we don't have to listen to his drivel anymore. And time takes care of a lot of stuff, okay? So Charlie Munger will go away in due course because no one lives to infinity. Only Bitcoin goes to infinity, but Charlie Munger's time on this earth will pass and we won't have to listen to his backward-looking view of life, and we can start looking forward, or we can start looking to some forward-looking views of people who understand how technology actually works, not someone who came into this world where the horse and carriage was, the primary mode of transportation. So I wish the man a happy life for the rest of his life, but it's not statistically going to be that much longer. So luckily, we don't have to listen to his drivel about how he made money on a flipped system. Give proper advice, Mr. Munger. I think you're probably a good person, but this spewing stuff about evil and then praising the Chinese government, man, oh man, someone's spiking your protein shakes with some fucking evil shit because you are telling absolute garbage to my kids and my kids.
Yeah, I don't know how you get to the good person part, Foss. I don't see any of it. Yeah, I mean, anybody who believes that the government should be able to ban something, ban software, ban code, ban speech, I mean, that's just so anti-libertarian, anti the correct ethics of my view of how the world ought to operate, that I have no tolerance for the guy whatsoever.
Yeah.
I don't listen to him. I don't, I mean, praising the Chinese government, for banning something. Okay, fine.
Right.
I don't, not what I believe.
Yeah. I don't wish the man ill will or anything, but it does remind me of, the quote, like innovation progresses one funeral at a time. Yeah. And that's kind of what I think about here. So we'll see.